So, good evening, good morning. We start chapter 5 tonight, the synthesis of the systems. It was published on the 15th of December in 1914 and brings to a completion what he would write in introduction to his main theme. So clearly, in January 1915, he was getting into the fullness of his work, and this is the last chapter that he wrote to set the stage for it. The Destiny of the Individual was the chapter he was writing in the Life Divine at the same time. So we begin. By the very nature of the principal yogic schools, each covering in its operations a part of the complex human integer and attempting to bring out its highest possibilities, it will appear that a synthesis of all of them, largely conceived and applied, might well result in an integral yoga. But they are so disparate in their tendencies, so highly specialized and elaborated in their forms, so long confirmed in the mutual opposition of their ideas and methods, that we do not easily find how we can arrive at their right union. So all of these different paths that led to a distinct connection to the divine were difficult to group into harmonious fusion. Note some of the words he uses here. Integer, one, undivided. Synthesis, to turn parts into a whole. Integral, again back to the term integer, to bring everything into a cooperating unity. So the question is, how can we get the various aspects of our nature, all of which yearn to be in communion with the divine, to actually work together? He continues, an undiscriminating combination in block would not be a synthesis, but a confusion. Nor would a successive practice of each of them in turn be easy in the short span of our human life and with our limited energies, to say nothing of the waste of labor implied in so cumbrous a process. Sometimes, indeed, Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga are thus successively practiced. Well, we don't actually see it indeed practiced. We see that the Hatha Pradipika advances the idea in theory, but not in practice. We don't find Hatha Yogans having consummated the practice of the asanas and pranayama to the point that they actually take up and exclusively focus on the Raja Yoga, which leaves all other phases of preparation behind. It's very demanding too. So, are you going to live long enough to complete Hatha Yoga? Are you going to live long enough to complete the perfection of the mind demanded in the Raja Yoga? So he continues, and in a recent unique example in the life of Ramakrishna Paramahansa, we see a colossal spiritual capacity, first driving straight to the divine realization, taking, as it were, the kingdom of heaven by violence, and then seizing upon one yogic method after another and extracting the substance out of it with an incredible rapidity, always to return to the heart of the whole matter, the realization and possession of God by the power of love, by the extension of inborn spirituality into various experience, and by the spontaneous play of an intuitive knowledge. Such an example cannot be generalized. We can't do what Ramakrishna did, in other words. Ramakrishna, who was very dear to Sri Aurobindo, born in 1836, left his body in 1886, barely 50 years old, but came to live in the constant communion and vision of the Divine Mother as Kali, realized when he took it up the Vedantic realization in a short matter of time, with some incidental help from his guru in that field, Totapuri. When he seized upon tantric methods, came to a rapid understanding and fulfillment in those paths. Also, when he looked into the Christian faith and into the Muslim faith, found his way to that reality that animates both. That conscious deity, that supreme being. Always he found, whatever the approach, that he arrived at the same reality, whether it be figured as an impersonal absolute or be figured as a supreme person. He found that they were not contradictory of each other, but rather consummately fused. Sri Aurobindo continues, its object, that is, this example, was special and temporal, to exemplify in the great and decisive experience of a master soul the truth now most necessary to humanity, towards which a world long divided into jarring sects and schools is with difficulty laboring. That all sects are forms and fragments of a single integral truth, and all disciplines labor in their different ways towards one supreme experience. Sri Aurobindo would comment on the nature of Sri Ramakrishna's achievement throughout his life, and found that in Sri Ramakrishna we have the consummation that closed by its perfection the age of religion, and in Ramakrishna's unifying example, find a door left ajar to go forward and climb beyond. Sri Aurobindo didn't claim for himself that he was that person, but we, seeing his advance, recognize in him a figure of progress, leading beyond through the process of evolution to a truth that exceeds, transcends all religious scope, that truly integrates. To know, be, and possess the divine is the one thing needful, and it includes or leads up to all the rest. Towards this sole good we have to drive, and this attained, all the rest that the divine will chooses for us, all necessary form and manifestation will be added. Sri Ramakrishna had the charming image, the metaphor, that God is like the roof of a house. It doesn't matter which ladder that you use to get to the roof. Find a ladder and get to the roof. And recognize that all ladders take you there. Don't dispute. Go. The synthesis we propose cannot, then, be arrived at either by combination in mass or by successive practice. Both of those approaches are exoteric. That's on the outside. It must therefore be effected by neglecting the forms and outsides of the yogic disciplines and seizing rather on some central principle common to all, which will include and utilize in the right place and proportion their particular principles, and on some central dynamic force, which is the common secret of their divergent methods, and capable, therefore, of organizing a natural selection and combination of their varied energies and different utilities. This was the aim which we set before ourselves at first when we entered upon our comparative examination of the methods of nature and the methods of yoga, and we now return to it with the possibility of hazarding some definite solution. So he's looking to go inside and find a central principle and a central force which will take us there. We observe first that there still exists in India a remarkable yogic system which is in its nature synthetical and starts from a great central principle of nature, a great dynamic force of nature. But it is a yoga apart, not a synthesis of other schools. This system is the way of the Tantra. Owing to certain of its developments, Tantra has fallen into discredit with those who are not Tantrics, and especially owing to the developments of the left-hand path, the Vama Marga, which, not content with exceeding the duality of virtue and sin, and instead of replacing them by spontaneous rightness of action, seemed sometimes to make a method of self-indulgence, a method of unrestrained social immorality. Nevertheless, in its origin, Tantra was a great and puissant system, founded upon ideas which were at least partially true. Even its twofold division into the right-hand and left-hand paths, Dakshina Marga and Vama Marga, started from a certain profound perception. In the ancient symbolic sense of the words Dakshina and Vama, it was the distinction between the way of knowledge and the way of Ananda. Nature in man liberating itself by right discrimination in power and practice of its own energies, elements, and potentialities, and nature in man liberating itself by joyous acceptance in power and practice of its own energies, elements, and potentialities. But in both paths, there was in the end an obscuration of principles, a deformation of symbols, and a fall, at least according to British sensibilities. The Tantra is a big subject. Historically, we don't even know when it began or where it began, but we have tantric texts which are at least as old as 600 CE. The word Tantra, from the root tan, T-A-N, to stretch, can, in its extension as Tantra, be seen as a loom. So people often think of this as that which makes the warp and the woof in fabric making. But also, in Vedic usage, Tanu means body, and the Tanu is stretched, Tantra, as a sacrifice on an altar by ritual. So Tantra could be that which stretches you in a ritualistic way as part of the giving of the substance to the divine. So Sri Aurobindo has mentioned here the classification that we're familiar with from Sir John Woodruff's translations and writings on the Tantra, say around 1920, 1922, etc., when he began to popularize things. We came to know of the so-called left path and the right path, Vamachara, So he's translated here as Vamamarga. It is also known as Vamachara, and it might be Vamachara, in which case the Vama might not simply mean that which is gentle or pleasant, but could be referring specifically to woman. In other words, an aspect, an extension of the great goddess, of the Shakti, into the situation, because the Tantra often has an orientation towards the goddess, towards the Shakti, or even if it's aimed at Shiva orientation, Shaivite, then nevertheless it evokes the power of the Shakti as a form of Shiva to come into action. So Vamachara would be a going, a motion, a course that carries you forward. Dakshinachara, Dakshina means south. So if you're facing the east according to the ritual, where the rising sun comes up, then Dakshina will be to your right. The south will be to your right, and hence has the aspect of a right-handed path. We know the Tantras and their teachings are very misunderstood in the West. Even now, a century after we've started translating all the Sanskrit into English, it is still mystifying. So many tantric texts exist, hundreds which have not yet been translated, not even been looked at in their manuscript forms fully. The things which made the Tantras abhorrent to the prudish sensibilities of the Victorian Brits, the fact that they seemed to engage in transgressive practices, that they enjoined the use of substances, etc., the practice of rites that violated social norms. And of course, the 5 M's were pointed out as examples of that. So the 5 M's were madhya, wine. In rituals, they would drink wine. Mamsa, meat. Sometimes they would eat meat in these rituals. Matsya, fish. All of these ruled out in ordinary social life, especially if you were a high caste member. Mudra, which obviously means gestures, but in this context means cereal, a kind of parched cereal, which one doesn't eat because it's supposed to enliven your desires, increase your appetites. And then finally, Maituna, which is sexual congress, would be part of these rituals. Now, there were in ancient times with the Pashupatas, etc., prior to the organization of tantric approaches, just exactly such things enjoined, and they continued on. And of course, when there's an evolution of forms, often there's a greater sophistication that comes, and some of the old substances found replacements of a suitable nature. Instead of using meat, we'll use this. Instead of having actual sexual congress, we'll do this. We'll turn things to the inner dimension, etc. So they became far more sophisticated over the centuries. Sri Aurobindo is here talking about Vamachara and Dakshinachara. And there are basically 7 acharas: Veda, Vaishnava, Shaiva, Dakshina, Vama, Siddhanta, Kaula. Let's move on with the text. We'll be having an occasion to come back to the Tantra even a little bit more tonight, but we needn't go through a long lecture about its early history at this moment. Sri Aurobindo continues, if, however, we leave aside here also the actual methods and practices and seek for the central principle, we find first that Tantra expressly differentiates itself from the Vedic methods of yoga. In a sense, all the schools we have hitherto examined are Vedantic in their principle. Their force is in knowledge. Their method is knowledge, though it is not always discernment by the intellect, but may be instead the knowledge of the heart expressed in love and faith, or a knowledge in the will working out through action. In all of them, the Lord of the yoga is the Purusha, the conscious soul that knows, observes, attracts, governs. But in Tantra, it is rather Prakriti, the nature soul, the energy, the will in power, executive in the universe. It was by learning and applying the intimate secrets of this will in power, its method, its Tantra, that the Tantric yogin pursued the aims of his discipline. Mastery, perfection, liberation, beatitude. Instead of drawing back from manifested nature and its difficulties, he confronted them, seized and conquered. But in the end, as is the general tendency of Prakriti, Tantric yoga largely lost its principle in its machinery and became a thing of formulae and occult mechanism, still powerful when rightly used, but fallen from the clarity of their original intention. We have, in this central Tantric conception, one side of the truth, the worship of the energy, the Shakti, as the sole effective force for all attainment. We get the other extreme in the Vedantic conception of the Shakti as a power of illusion, and in the search after the silent, inactive Purusha as the means of liberation from the deceptions created by the active energy. But in the integral conception, the conscious soul is the Lord. The nature soul is his executive energy. Purusha is of the nature of Sat, the being of conscious self-existence, pure and infinite. Shakti or Prakriti is of the nature of Chit. It is power of the Purusha's self-conscious existence, pure and infinite. The relation of the two exists between the poles of rest and action. So we have a picture then of release from the confines of confusing nature according to Vedantic approach, either in heart or in the dynamism of the will or in the knowledge of the mind that lifts us out of that. And we have instead in the Tantric conception something that affirms the conscious energy of the Shakti. In a balance of the two, there is a fusion. There's an integration. Purusha and Shakti, Purusha and Prakriti, Purusha and Prakriti, Ishvara and Shakti are the same reality. One is at rest, watching, sanctioning. The other dynamizes the secret will of the existence. And here again, the idea that Purusha is Sat And Shakti is Chit, takes us to that elemental concept of Sat Chit Ananda, which is so important to Sri Aurobindo and to later Vedanta. So when the energy is absorbed in the bliss of conscious self-existence, there is rest. When the Purusha pours itself out in the action of its energy, there is action, creation, and the enjoyment or ananda of becoming. But if ananda is the creator and begetter of all becoming, its method is tapas or force of the Purusha's consciousness, dwelling upon its own infinite potentiality in existence and producing from it truths of conception or real ideas, vijnana, which, proceeding from an omniscient and omnipotent self-existence, have the surety of their own fulfillment and contain in themselves the nature and law of their own becoming in the terms of mind, life, and matter. So this is his own cosmology reduced to a couple of sentences. That Sat expresses itself through Chit, and Chit, through the power of its own force, compresses its infinity into the constellated perfection of vijnana, which is the supramental interpretation and visioning and extension of that infinite reality into harmonious forms, which substantiate themselves in the involution of the universe, first at the plane of mind, then in the plane and level of life, and finally deposited that secret reality, that conscious existence, even in matter. He continues, the eventual omnipotence of tapas and the infallible fulfillment of the idea are the very foundation of all yoga. Yes, because if you apply your energy in concentration, the obstacle before you must yield. Whatever it symbolizes in terms of obscurity, of concealment, the pressure of conscious, wakeful force will open that form and reveal the reality inside. So nothing can resist the power of yogic concentration. Let's read that again. The eventual omnipotence of tapas. Tapas means heat, concentrated power that generates heat. The eventual omnipotence of tapas and the infallible fulfillment of the idea is vijnana again, are the very foundation of all yoga. In man, we render these terms by will and faith. A will that is eventually self-effective because it is of the substance of knowledge, and a faith that is the reflex in the lower consciousness of a truth or real idea, yet unrealized in the manifestation. So the idea is real. It's not conjecture, it's not flimsy, it's not absent of power. A real idea born in the supramental consciousness is a figure of that one existence of Sat. So it is by definition substantial. It is by definition powerful. So it is real, it really exists, but it also has the power to realize, to push itself into form and effectuate its intention. It is this self-certainty of the idea which is meant by the Gita when it says, Yo yat shraddha sa eva saha. Whatever is a man's faith or the sure idea in him, that he becomes. This is Bhagavad Gita in the 17th chapter. This is the 3rd verse. We see then what, from the psychological point of view, and yoga is nothing but practical psychology, is the conception of nature from which we have to start. It is the self-fulfillment of the Purusha through his energy. But the movement of nature is twofold, higher and lower, or, as we may choose to term it, divine and undivine. The distinction exists indeed for practical purposes only, for there is nothing that is not divine. And in a larger view, it is as meaningless verbally as the distinction between natural and supernatural, for all things that are natural. All things are in nature, and all things are in God. But for practical purposes, there is a real distinction. The lower nature of that which we know and are, and must remain so long as the faith in us is not changed, acts through limitation and division, is of the nature of ignorance and culminates in the life of the ego. But the higher nature, that to which we aspire, acts by unification and transcendence of limitation, is of the nature of knowledge and culminates in the life divine. The passage from the lower to the higher is the aim of yoga, and this passage may effect itself by the rejection of the lower and escape into the higher, the ordinary viewpoint, or by the transformation of the lower and its elevation to the higher nature. It is this, rather, that must be the aim of an integral yoga. So he says, certainly it's true that you can escape, that you can transcend and climb back to that truth, that high knowledge, and leave this behind. But an integral yoga aims at bringing that high knowledge down and pushing it into the tissue of the earth. But in either case, it is always through something in the lower that we must rise into the higher existence. And the schools of yoga each select their own point of departure or their own gate of escape. They specialize certain activities of the lower prakriti and turn them towards the divine. But the normal action of nature in us is an integral movement in which the full complexity of all our elements is affected by and affects all our environments. The whole of life is the yoga of nature. We're back to his opening essay, All Life is Yoga. The yoga that we seek must also be an integral action of nature. And the whole difference between the yogin and the natural man will be this, that the yogin seeks to substitute in himself for the integral action of the lower nature working in and by ego and division, the integral action of the higher nature working in and by God and unity. If indeed our aim be only an escape from the world to God, synthesis is unnecessary and a waste of time, for then our sole practical aim must be to find out one path out of the 1,000 that lead to God, one shortest possible of shortcuts, and not to linger exploring different paths that end in the same goal. But if our aim be a transformation of our integral being into the terms of God existence, it is then that a synthesis becomes necessary. So I think this is a good place to put our bookmark for the moment. But let's note a couple of things about Tantra before we leave. Obviously, the Tantra will seize upon the elements of our actual nature as the means of approaching the divine. Accepts the opposition of elements in us which deflect, discourage, or deny that aspiration as opportunities of advance, seeks to convert them, demands that they change their nature. Now, that means that the secret divinity, which is in every form, must be awakened, brought to full figure, and founds the siddhi, the fulfillment. There has to be a sincere aspirant. There has to be a teacher, one who is substantial, one who is the guru. Guru means heavy. Guru means one who has substance. The guru lives, if he's worth anything, in communion with that, and so represents that divine goal. The guru, in conjunction with the seeker, with the aspirant, enjoins upon him a sadhana. A sadhana is a spiritual discipline. Sad means to go straight. So a sadhana is a path, an effortful discipline imposed upon one that takes you from where you are to where you're going to go. And so it will consist of a diksha, an initiation, of a ritual action that you'll have to take, since we're talking about Tantra. And finally, of yoga, practicing yoga. So the ritual purifies and divinizes the body through the mantra, through the yantra, through the mudra. The enactment of the ritual imposes upon the nature, physically, emotionally, and mentally, a joining with the descending power of the Godhead. There are hierarchical cosmologies involved in this, because higher worlds are descending into lower worlds. Lower worlds are being lifted up to higher worlds. The body is regarded as divine. It is the point of instantiation where that energy, that Shakti, conjoins with the individual. The cosmos entirely dwells within the individual. The individual entirely dwells within the cosmos. It is when this conscious reality, represented as Shiva, comes into conscious union with the power of consciousness, represented as Shakti, that one has the unification, the experience of unity, the fulfillment, the gratification in which Sat and Chit are reconjoined, and what one has is Ananda. The Ananda that pre-existed above, before there ever was a universe, is recovered in the experience of the individual waking to it in the cosmos. So one has then both the fulfillment, the siddhi, and the bhoga. You have the knowledge and you have the enjoyment. Both are there. Now, there is also a context in which tantric life is practiced. It is not simply the relationship between the guru and the shishya, but there is a large community. There is a family of practice, so that awakening soul is conjoined to awakening soul, and there's a vast community and all work together in social cohesion as well as in conscious cohesion to the ritual, so that the gains are not simply to the merit of the individual, but are shared with the community as a whole. So the idea of a conscious community comes into possibility. The idea that the yoga extends beyond the individual scope and has impact on the group is also there. Well, these things we'll take up more as we go along, but a few introductory remarks, I guess, are permissible. So now we go to Savitri on this subject of the power of nature. This is from Book 1, the Book of Beginnings, in Canto 5, the Yoga of the Spirit's Freedom and Greatness. This is on page 84 that we start. In her mysteries moods, divorced from the Maker's laws, she too as sovereignly creates her field, her will shaping the undetermined vasts, making a finite of infinity. She too can make an order of her caprice, as if her rash superb wagered to outvie the veiled Creator's cosmic secrecies. The rapid footsteps of her fantasy, amid whose falls wonders like flowers rise, are surer than reason, defter than device, and swifter than imagination's wings. All she new fashions by the thought and word, compels all substance by her wand of mind. Mind is a mediator divinity. Its powers can undo all nature's work. Mind can suspend or change earth's concrete law. A franchise from earth habit's drowsy seal, the leaden grip of matter it can break. Indifferent to the angry stare of death, it can immortalize a moment's work. A simple fiat of its thinking force, the casual pressure of its slight assent, can liberate the energy dumb and pent within its chambers of mysterious trance. It makes the body sleep a puissant arm, holds still the breath, the beatings of the heart, while the unseen is found, the impossible done, communicates without means the unspoken thought. It moves events by its bare silent will, acts at a distance without hands or feet. This giant ignorance, this dwarfish life, it can illumine with a prophet's sight, invoke the Bacchic rapture, the Furies' goad, in our body arouse the demon or the god, call in the omniscient and omnipotent, awake a forgotten almightiness within. In its own plane, a shining emperor, even in this rigid realm, mind can be king. The logic of its demigod idea, in the leap of a transitional moment, brings surprises of creation never achieved even by matter's strange unconscious skill. All's miracle here, and can, by miracle, change. This is that secret nature's edge of might. On the margin of great immaterial plains, in kingdoms of an untrammeled glory of force, where mind is master of the life and form, and soul fulfills its thoughts by its own power, she meditates upon mighty words and looks on the unseen links that join the parted spheres. Thence to the initiate who observes her laws. She brings the light of her mysterious realms. Here where he stands, his feet on a prostrate world, his mind no more cast into matter's mold, over their bounds in spurts of splendid strength, she carries their magician processes and the formulas of their stupendous speech, till heaven and hell become purveyors to earth, and all the universe the slave of mortal will. A mediatrix with veiled and nameless gods, whose alien will touches our human life. Imitating the world magician's ways, she invents for her self-bound free will its grooves, and feigns for magic's freaks a binding cause. All worlds she makes the partners of her deeds, accomplices of her mighty violence, her daring leaps into the impossible. From every source she has taken her cunning means. She draws from the free love marriage of the plains elements for her creation's tour de force. A wonder weft of knowledge incalculable, a compendium of divine invention's feats, she has combined to make the unreal true, or liberate suppressed reality. In her unhedged Circean wonderland, pell-mell she shepherds her occult mightinesses. Her mnemonics of the craft of the infinite, jets of the screened subliminal's caprice, tags of the gramarye of inconscience, freedom of a sovereign truth without a law, thoughts that were born in the immortal's world, oracles that break out from behind the shrine, warnings from the daemonic inner voice, and peeps and lightning leaps of prophecy, and intimations to the inner ear, abrupt interventions stark and absolute, and the superconscient's unaccountable acts, have woven her balanced web of miracles and the weird technique of her tremendous art. So, namaste, Jai Ma.